maybe if the Chinese land on the moon before we can get back to it, it'll be a good wake-up call for how we need to do things differently. But I think that that's a far more likely outcome than it is that the U.S. is going to get back there anytime soon, unfortunately.
Thanks so much for joining me today, Jared. I'm super excited to get you on the program. Jared is commander of the Polaris space flight program. He was also commander of Inspiration 4. Many of you have probably seen that Netflix documentary. Jared is CEO of Shift 4, a payment processor company that has IPO'd during the pandemic, if I'm not mistaken. That must have been an experience. I wanted to talk to you a little bit, first of all, about your childhood, about how you became Jared Isaacman. I know, I think you dropped out of high school to start a company that eventually became the payment giant Shift4. What inspired your entrepreneurial spirit? Do you have any childhood stories of paper routes or door-to-door sales, or what was it like to be little Jared?
So first, thanks. Thanks for having me on the Spaces. This is cool. I'll try and keep things a little bit interesting. But I'm the youngest of my siblings by a pretty wide margin. I was like I think an Atlantic City mistake or something. So my brother. My eldest brother's 15 years older than me. My sister is 13 years older than me, and my other brother's 8 years older than me. So, bottom line is like the earliest memories I can go back to, my brothers and sisters were already out kind of living their life. I mean, they, were either in college or, graduating. And I guess it kind of helped the maturing process for me because I was much more interested in living their kind of independent life than, going through, school and, raising your hand to get permission to go to the bathroom, like things like that. Just I was like, I want to do my own thing. So bottom line is I had a job from like very young ages. My parents were very much about, independence, kind of self-reliance. If you want something, work hard and get it. So, I was lying about my age before I could even get a work permit to caddy and work at Burger King. And ultimately, just wanting to be able to, provide for myself is what, motivated me to, really start a business. And it was exposure to seeing how kind of other companies operated and finding opportunity, and then, leaving and doing the basement startup thing. So, I was definitely, I didn't have a paper route, but I definitely had a lot of jobs starting at probably like 12.
So you said, I think I heard Burger King and also a caddy. Are those actual jobs that you had?
Yeah, for sure.
How long did you stick around at Burger King?
A summer, I think. I was probably like 13 or so at that point. I am sure I got more value out of the free food and the 50% discount than I did what they were paying me. Like I ate a lot of Burger King that summer.
Did you learn anything in terms of like what you did or didn't want out of life when you were doing those early jobs?
It's like it's a means for a paycheck. I wanted things. Maybe when I was like 13, I wanted the newest paintball gun or something, or new rollerblades. Like you just had to work to get something. I do think that, I kind of felt very early on, and again, this is probably an influence from my older siblings and my parents, is if you're going to do the job, don't do a shitty one. Like I didn't want to be average at anything, even if it was like making a Whopper. Actually, I don't even know if that's true. I don't think they let you work the grill at that age. I was probably just like a cashier. But anyway, I think like having a good work ethic, and was always pretty important, even at a young age.
Did you always want to be an astronaut? Did you always want to be a fighter pilot? Did you always want to be a CEO? What did you sort of picture yourself doing during those stages?
Yeah, interestingly, I certainly imagined myself as a pilot, dreamed of being an astronaut, though I think also was tried to be, pretty realistic that was pretty low probability of happening. This is all like, exposure to movies at a young age. Top Gun, The Right Stuff, Space Camp. Of course, it was like, who wouldn't want to, grow up and do those kind of things? But I think being a pilot seemed like the more realistic of the path. Uh, and uh, and in terms of like, just business and how my career has developed from there, again, that was just, wanted to, work hard, build a good company to kind of enable things I wanted to do in life. I never would have imagined when I was 16 and started Shift 4 it would be anywhere near, the size of a company it's grown into. But I think that's just another, thing that drives me is you're always seeking out the next biggest challenge. So, you conquer something as a small business and then you take on something as a mid-sized business. And, the next thing you're a public company on the New York Stock Exchange. So that's just always seeking out a bigger and greater, harder challenge that wound up here, but not what I envisioned, 24 years ago.
Did you have like a difficult process of deciding whether or not you were going to go on to college or continue with your business? Was that something that was real natural, or how'd that go?
Yeah, so that's an interesting story. When I left high school, my parents were pretty firm that I had to get at least a high school equivalency. So I got my GED, like that was the deal at 16. I don't think I would have gone back and got my college degree if it wasn't for my aviation interest. So, um, I started. I've had a really long and super fortunate aviation career, but in 2008, I started to fly ex-military aircraft. I think L-39s, but I started to fly the Collings Foundation A4 Skyhawk in a Vietnam heritage flight, and that ultimately introduced me to some pretty awesome individuals. We put together an airshow team in 2011 with 7 jets. It was very much like the Thunderbirds. In fact, we had 2 ex-Thunderbirds on our team. And, it was actually during that time period in 2011, I was like, wow, you can actually fly in the military part-time. Like you could be in the Guard or the reserves. And I was like, wow, I wish I had known that, some years prior. But you need a college degree. And so I, enrolled in Embry-Riddle and banged that out. So it was much more about opening up additional opportunities in aviation of why I got a college degree than it was about kind of my day job career track.
I've done a bit of reading about your piloting now. I heard you have is it the Ghost Squadron? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, so we're getting the band back together. So our airshow team in 2011, our first airshow was in early 2011. We were doing like football game flyovers prior to that and such, but like our first like as a team was the 2011 season, and our last airshow was Cherry Point in 2014. We got very focused on Draken, which is a defense aerospace company that I co-founded, and that occupied a lot of time. So now, we've been kind of toying around the last 2 years, showing up at Oshkosh and some other shows, but we've decided to get the band back together and start doing, real air shows again. So we call it the Ghost Squadron. We have 8 fighters, 4 L-39s, 3 Alpha jets, and a MiG-29, and we're going to put together like a very cool, very dynamic display starting this season.
Do you create your own shows from scratch and promote them, or do you like piggyback on top of a military base air show that happens like on a schedule?
Yeah, so basically there's a conference every year called ICAS, International Council of Air Shows, and that's where all the teams show up at, and then all the show sites, which are some are at military bases, but a lot of them are just cities. So we're doing, say the Fort Lauderdale Air Show, for example, or the Houston Air Show this year. They kind of all, compete for acts, if you will. And we don't charge for our show. We ask that every show site give, 50 tickets, VIP tickets to St. Jude families at every show site, and some VIP treatment for them. And and we give them the act for free. So we were in pretty high demand. We got to pick which shows we went to, and we just drew upon the shows that have a good space component to it, because inspiring the next generation of people to kind of dream about the stars is part of what we do. And so we picked space themed shows, and also just shows that we had flown previously in our careers that we loved, and that's where we wound up at for 2024.
How super cool. I want to talk about St. Jude's for a minute. I think you used to maybe raise for Make-A-Wish. My cousin got to benefit from Make-A-Wish when I was a kid, and he was suffered from childhood cancer. Eventually, he passed from childhood leukemia. So it's like not a really fun subject, but a really dear subject to me. How did you choose childhood or child hospitals as your fundraising target? Is there like something that happened in your life that made it important to you, or talk to me about that?
I think everybody and really, by the way, I'm very sorry to hear about your cousin. That's terrible. That just sucks, man. But I think everybody is in some way or another been touched in a bad way by cancer. I think fortunately, no childhood cancer is not, directly affected anyone in my family, and we're very lucky for that. But where this kind of goes back to it, and really, I think I was about 5 years old. We did a family trip to Mexico, and I remember just seeing literally this family living out of a tire in the streets. And I mean, I had just allowance money, and I gave it to that family, but it left a mark on me that look, just people can be dealt a lot of shitty hands in life, and by no fault of their own. Just then we don't get to pick who we're born to, or where we're born, or how healthy we are when we are born. It's like, just some people get dealt a really lousy hand in life, and I've been fortunate. I've been dealt a very good hand, and I think that just creates like an obligation for those that are fortunate in life to try and make life a little bit better for those who aren't. So like literally, while we were still a basement company, we were donating what we could to local homeless shelters, and then I got exposed to the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And to me, I mean, it's a shame that an organization like that even needs to exist, to give kids like one last wish, who many don't make it. That's it's pretty terrible. But as long as people do, as long as families are impacted in such a way, then I'm all for doing whatever we can to make some of their last memories, good memories. And so I supported Make-A-Wish through a lot of adventures that I've been on, like always trying to make like whatever adventure I'm lucky enough to go on about something bigger and do something to help others. So the world record flights were to benefit the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Our air shows from 2011 to 2014 were all about Make-A-Wish, bringing wish families out. We named maneuvers in the air show about the Make-A-Wish role. We tried to just raise good awareness. When it came to Inspiration 4, going to space, what a huge platform for to raise awareness for a charitable cause. It occurred to me that if an organization like St. Jude, who I've also had a relationship with for 20 years, if they're successful, then you don't need to grant as many wishes. And then St. Jude kind of became my focus since Inspiration 4, and it continues on with everything we do today, including our air shows with the Go Squadron.
It seems clear to me that advancing civilian spaceflight is also important to you. I saw you gushing how Starbase and Starship were funded by non-government entities. I think that was on the NASA Spaceflight podcast that you did with Everyday Astronaut, where you more or less said that you don't care about the definition of astronaut. You're just happy to be involved in any capacity with these cool advancements. Besides being an aviation dork, like I watched Top Gun, I wanted to be a fighter pilot until I knew what it meant to actually fight. Besides being a fellow entrepreneur and a space nerd, what really drew me to want to get you on this podcast and to speak with you live on X Spaces was that you seem to have like a passion and a conviction, be a man of principle and in pursuit of mission. What is your mission, Jared? Like, what is it that you would like to accomplish, if nothing else in this life?
Yeah, well, there's a lot there to it. Let's just start with kind of the end of it. Like, I think that, we all have an obligation to just leave the world a better and more interesting place than we found it. And along that journey, just do as much as you can to do the right thing. I think that kind of wraps up a lot of it. It explains why I'm very interested in commercial space and opening up this last great frontier. I mean, it's just inevitable. Like, we will journey beyond our world, and we will, unlock a lot of the mysteries that still exist in our solar system, let alone our galaxy, our universe, and along the way, just make life better for humankind and here on our home planet Earth, for sure. Um, but it can't be like a singular focus on the future. We have to like recognize the problems, the challenges that are here and now. And man, I can't think of any that's more important than childhood cancer. Just children that are born with a shitty hand and will never even have an opportunity, many of them, to grow up and experience, a fraction of what I've been lucky enough to do in life. So that absolutely, plays into it, and that will continue, right? A good balance between that future that we all hope to live in someday, and trying to tackle some of the problems that we're faced with today. And well, I would tell you, just on that comment about like, the how impressed I am, and I mean, I've said it many times, like the being a small fly on the wall with what SpaceX is doing is just as impactful as the missions itself. And I know that sounds like extreme. Like, how can it measure up to being in space? Believe me, it can. Like, watching an organization like that function and just change the world is pretty awesome to observe. But my comments about like it being privately funded and what they're doing, some people will interpret that as, just another Elon fan drinking the Kool-Aid and going off the rails. It's actually not. I mean, I spent 10 years as the CEO of a defense aerospace company. Like, I know how every other big defense prime works because I worked alongside him building what became a very big business. We were one of the largest private air forces in the world, over 100 fighter jets, training the U.S. military and our allies every single day. And I've seen, like, the Lockheeds, the Boeings, the Northrops, they don't touch a keyboard without a contract. They don't build anything unless somebody pays them to do it. Like, there is no self-funded research and development. Like, they want a contract before they lift a finger. And meanwhile, you have this organization that literally builds, a city out of nowhere and self-funds. And like, no, they don't self-fund. They got all these subsidies, whatever. They got a contract to deliver a service, just like any other big defense company. They are self-funding a ton to build a capability out that can really change the trajectory of humankind. Yeah, I was gushing over it. I think it's damn impressive, and I'd love to see 100 other companies do similar things like that. That would certainly help make the world a better and more interesting place.
I couldn't agree more. I think private funding makes the wheels turn in a way that's much more efficient than we see, sort of any other way, especially through government and those contracts. Like you mentioned, so many people are extremely lucky, right? You mentioned you've been extremely lucky and been able to do a lot of things. I mean, I talk about when I was pitching this to the listeners, that you do all the things I wanted to do when I grew up, right? Like, you're an astronaut and you're a fighter pilot and you're a CEO, and these are things that many children dream of. Those who do achieve many of those things, whether it's through luck or something else, a lot of them become spoiled. A lot of them become, entitled. It doesn't seem that you're that way at all. You're making time for us on this platform. You talk about giving back to St. Jude's and making the world a better place. Is there, like, can you go back to your childhood or at any time in your life and talk about maybe something that shaped you, that got you into that mindset of being unselfish and helping other people?
Well, I think, look, certainly how I was raised was definitely played a pretty big role. But I also, been on this journey for a long time through what I would consider like relatively non-traditional path. We're not a Silicon Valley darling. We never had a Series A, B, C, or D. Like I think staying grounded, that like you gotta do this yourself. You weren't hand touched by God to become an entrepreneur. Like this is like this is a fight, and no matter how well you perform, how good your idea is, how solid your business plan is, like the ball cannot bounce your way like a lot. Like luck is a factor for sure. And I think if you stay in touch with that reality, like you'll make better decisions. You'll certainly be like a better human being. And by the way, that's a pretty big part of leadership, and tens.
Jared, did your mic turn off, or is
Sounded
it
like you
mine?
got a phone call.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
He's back. You cut out,
Oh,
Jared.
sorry about that.
You cut out right when you were talking about being a
Yeah,
leader.
no, just saying like, certainly being in touch with reality, grounded, and not believing you're like God's gift to business is pretty important, and it certainly goes a long way with your team, your employees, your customers, staying in touch with that reality. So anyway, I kind of know where we've come from. I know our journey, and if you do know it, then I think it's easy to kind of, like I said, stay grounded and in touch with reality.
Let's start talking a little bit about the Polaris program, and maybe also a little bit about Starship. Where did you watch the Starship Flight 2 launch from, and what does it feel like knowing that eventually you're going to take a ride on that giant ship?
So I watched the orbital test flight 2 from South Padre Island at the SpaceX viewing location. I was with the Polaris Dawn crew. It was awesome. I mean, we got to do a very cool flyover before and after the launch, which I think is cool. It gets everybody, pretty charged up. I think it's also a nice salute to all the employees that are down there that are making this kind of world-changing technology, possible. So anyway, watching it launch just felt like we're taking a step in the right direction. Um, I really don't watch the launch and think about who's going to be on it at some point in the future. I like when it comes to that, I think about Polaris Dawn. Like we have a mission that's going to be coming up, really shortly, and I think about that. But I do also think about just the implications it has for really all of humankind. We've been able to go to space for, well over 60 years at this point, and it's still only 600 and some odd folks that have actually been to orbit. The vast majority of that time has been spent at the International Space Station, which, is pretty much the same distance above us as it is from where I'm sitting in Pennsylvania to like North Carolina. It's actually not that far when you consider like our solar system, let alone our galaxy or universe. Like we got to get going. We really do. Like this, we should be certainly thinking well beyond the moon, which isn't happening anytime soon, which is unfortunate, and well beyond Mars as well. So the best chance we've got to really open up that frontier is Starship, because it is fully reusable. That makes a huge difference when, from a cost perspective, when you're not throwing away your ride every single time. And SpaceX is thinking about scaling it. Like they're building factories, not to make one or two rockets, but to make hundreds or thousands, so that we could have at some point armadas exploring our solar system. But even not forget just from a human, space flight perspective, having essentially a prefab space vehicle can change the entire game of and our thinking on what space stations look like, or infrastructure in orbit, or flying telescopes. I mean, the potential, like it can and it will change everything when it comes online. So that's what's going through my mind when I see Starship launch.
So you're going up on a Falcon 9 then for Polaris Dawn. You want to talk a little bit about that mission and what you're trying to accomplish? I think you're doing a spacewalk on that one and testing out a new suit.
Yeah.
Is that right?
No, super excited about it. I mean, we announced Polaris Dawn almost 2 years ago, which is actually not that long from like a typical mission timeline, but does seem long compared to Inspiration 4 that, was announced, crew selected, trained, launched, recovered in less than a year. But it's different. Inspiration 4 was the first, and it was about showing it could be done, and getting people excited about the future. This is different. Polaris program is test and development program. We're doing things that haven't been done in a long time or never been done before. It takes time. But yeah, Polaris Dawn, we're going to have a 1,400 kilometer apogee. So, I mean, that's the highest Earth orbit ever flown. It's certainly farther from the Earth since the last time we walked on the moon, but still relatively not that far. But it does help us develop a lot of things. When you're in a higher radiation environment, there's a lot you can learn from that, not just from a science perspective, but vehicle architecture. We're going to descend from that very high apogee, vent the capsule down to vacuum. We're going to do a spacewalk with a brand new spacesuit that SpaceX has been developing for about 2 years now. It draws a lot of influence from the IVA suit, but still different. Builds in, instead of like a last line of defense, it's your primary means to stay alive now. You're intentionally throwing away all the lines of defense that you have typically in a spaceship and going outside it. So that means it needs a lot of insulation for the thermal environment, redundancy on life support consumables, getting oxygen from more than one path, and mobility and dexterity that you wouldn't normally have in an IVA suit. So, it's kind of exciting, like not only to see the evolution over the last 2 years, but to know that SpaceX isn't thinking about building this for Polaris Dawn. They're thinking about testing it on Polaris Dawn. What they're thinking about is how they can build hundreds or thousands of low-cost suits for people on the moon and Mars someday. Now, that's a couple generations from what will fly, but that's what they're thinking about. So it's cool, and then we're going to communicate over Starlink with laser link comms for at least a portion of the mission. And we have 5 days of science and research. So it's exciting. Polaris Dawn's got a lot that we want to get done with it.
You said we are going to do a spacewalk. Are there going to be multiple astronauts leaving the ship? Are you going to be one of the folks actually exiting and taking a spacewalk?
So we have 4 crew. We have no airlock. We will all be in EVA suits. And there will be 2 crew members that will ultimately leave the vehicle. So that's your EV1, EV2, and then you have 2 support crew members that are monitoring things inside the ship and supporting the EVA. And we haven't announced who's doing what, but I mean, if you go back to Gemini Apollo standards, you vent the vehicle down and you open the hatch. Like the people inside got a stand-up EVA credit, and the people went outside got an EVA credit. So as far as I'm concerned, we're all doing an EV.
I heard you also at one point talk about the risk reward of doing things like that. How you fly jets in a formation, and that's super dangerous. Maybe I drive a car to work, and that's super dangerous. But when we do those things, there's no real major benefit to humanity. When you do things like Polaris Dawn, where you're launching into space and doing new science, how do you calculate the risk reward on those things? How do you feel about putting your life on the line and launching into space and doing things that, as you said, maybe only what would you say, 100 people or so have been to orbit at this point?
Just over 600, yeah. Which is not a lot in 70, just under 70 years. But I think that I do like a relative risk calculation on a lot of things I do. I apply that in business as well as, some of these personal endeavors I go on. So yeah, no doubt flying air shows in my mind is the riskiest thing I've ever done. You're doing loops and rolls 18 inches apart, going 400 plus miles an hour with other jet aircraft. When I was on the air show circuit, there were crashes almost every weekend. And then, what was the payoff for that? Well, it's a challenge. You're doing some good. We were raising funds and awareness for Make-A-Wish Foundation, but then I do that in a comparison to what we're doing with Polaris and SpaceX. We're helping unlock this last great frontier. The questions that could be answered someday by our ability to go out and explore, our universe, could change everything. Not to mention just what could happen, in the near future with commercial space. Whether it's biomedical, like manufacturing, we 3D printing organs in space. I mean, there is so much that can be done here that we haven't even begun to scratch the surface on. Not to mention the risk, I think, is less. SpaceX has shown it. I mean, we've landed first stage boosters successfully back on either the ground or on a ship more than 200 times at this point. I think you're talking about 10,000 of the smartest, most motivated people that I've ever met, and they know a setback, like at any stage, could derail the timeline for Mars for decades. I mean, even an uncrewed cargo, commercial payload mission, if something unexpected happens there, will impact the timelines. So they think about it on every single mission. They keep their bigger vision in sight, and that inspires a lot of confidence for the people who are riding on these rockets. So I think the risk is less, and the reward for sure, for all humankind is substantially greater. Even if it's low probability that it ever develops into something that is really world changing, it's worth it.
Let's talk about the other Polaris missions that are roughly planned as well. Polaris, do they have names also like Dawn, or is it just Polaris 2 and 3 at this point?
Just 2 and 3 until those become, the next up mission. But Polaris 3 is the first end-to-end crewed flight of Starship. So a full launch on orbit, re-entry, propulsive landing. So we got some time on that, as I think a lot of people could imagine. But Polaris 2 will be another Falcon Dragon mission. And the idea was always to build off of what we learned from Polaris 1. So certainly Polaris Dawn has a big emphasis on EVA and spacesuit development. So I would expect that there to be a pretty sizable jump between Polaris Dawn and Polaris 2 in that regard. And then, what else can we accomplish that enhances commercial space abilities? Because keep in mind, up until, the last couple of years, all of the knowledge and capabilities, to operate in low Earth orbit and beyond lived with 3 governments, essentially. The United States, Russia, and now the Chinese are quickly developing their capabilities. It's not going to work that way in a world where hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, a million people someday are in low Earth orbit or on the lunar surface or Mars. Like, these capabilities have to be developed, and the experience associated with it have to be matured for there to be a thriving commercial space industry. So what else can we do in Polaris 2 beyond the ongoing development of the suit and EVA operations that help commercial space? We've certainly proposed in a joint Polaris SpaceX NASA study to rendezvous with Hubble, augment it and boost it. That does a lot for the science community. It certainly enhances commercial space capabilities a lot. There's some politics involved in that, so we'll have to see how that plays out. But I don't know. I can't say I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful. And but if that doesn't fly, then we have some other plans too that we think will be pretty beneficial to bridge until we eventually have Starship online.
So is Hubble in trouble? I didn't even mean to rhyme there. Is there something that needs to be repaired on Hubble? And can you talk a little bit about the politics and maybe what makes it difficult?
Yeah, Hubble is not healthy. It hasn't been healthy for a long time. It shed a lot of redundancy. I think most people know that it doesn't have. Take like the INS, INU systems. It's got like 2.5 that are good. But look, without getting into specifics, there's news articles like every 6 months about it going in safe mode. So I think people, you do a little harm, it's in trouble. The other thing is like this is starting to turn into the what goes up must come down. Its orbit is decaying. And as it decays, it's going to accelerate, and we are going into like a higher solar cycle, so that will cause it to decay even faster. Like Hubble, inside of 10 years is going to meet a fiery death. Your choices there are to, as taxpayers, we can spend a lot of money. I would say at least $500 million to send up, autonomous, deorbit capability. And all that means is we are going to spend a lot of money to burn it up in a controlled way. Or for free, Polaris and SpaceX will go up, rendezvous with it, augment it so it's healthier because it is not healthy today, boost it up so it can operate alongside James Webb for maybe another 10 years. And then hopefully Starship is online. And at that point, the cost is so minimal, we should be able to go up and retrieve Hubble and put it in the Smithsonian. And that doesn't cost taxpayers anything. So from my perspective, this is a no-brainer. Like we should totally be doing this. Politics, sure. I'm sure that's a factor in it. Up until now, there's only been, one group that would ever touch Hubble, and I think that they have an opinion of who should or shouldn't be allowed to touch it. And I guess, like, to be honest, I think the lot would say I'd rather it burn up than go down a slippery slope of the space community growing. So I so I think that's a factor, and unfortunately, but again, like I said, I'm hopeful that I'm hopeful the math is easy on this one, and that the direction that the world is going to in terms of commercial space is it's hard to put that back in the bottle at this point. Like, this is, it's not going to be just the Army flying our mail. This is space is going to be open up, to the many soon enough, and probably better to be on the right side of that.
So is there a resistance to that? It sounds like there's a feeling that people are kind of wanting to gatekeep space. Is that the Army? Can you talk about that?
No, I don't. I mean, I think that it's there is an old space and there is a new space, and there's a lot of people that would prefer it to stay the old space. But I mean, I think, as we've seen with Inspiration 4 and Axiom flights, like that's not going to happen. There's too much money that has gone into opening up commercial space. There's too much opportunity, and frankly, it's not going to remain the exclusive domain of governments anymore. And that doesn't take away of anything they accomplished. I mean, they are all my heroes, not just the astronauts, the NASA astronauts of the past, but like all of the thousands and hundreds of thousands of engineers and scientists, researchers, mathematicians that made it possible. But like, this isn't going to happen in a big way, not the way most of us imagine it, if it just stays exclusively within the government. I mean, the government isn't great with capital allocation. I mean, everything costs way too much and takes way too long. And when you operate like that, programs get canceled. Like, we can't be feeling great about where Artemis is going right now. Like, we're announcing missions that'll take place like every 3 or 4 years. I mean, geez, the whole moon landing phase of the Apollo program, like, they got multiple landings in the same time period from when Artemis 1 launched to when Artemis 2 will eventually launch. It might be way worse than that at this phase. So like, we got to do better, and I think the way that happens is through competition. Competition drives down costs, it forces innovation, and that's what the commercial industry aims to do. So yeah, I think that, like, we are lucky we get to stand on the shoulders of all these giants, but there is going to be a new space, and frankly, if you want to be on the right side of new space, like, we should go up and we should help Hubble, and continue to develop capabilities that are important for the commercial industry.
I just don't see the upside of keeping the commercial industry out of space. As you said, there's so many upsides. It's curious to me that anyone would want to stop it, but we can move on past that. Polaris 3, you said, is the first end-to-end manned flight of Starship. Do you think that that's possible, that you do a lunar landing? What's your timeline look like in terms of landing on the moon at this point?
Well, I mean, I think the first moon landings are going to be NASA astronauts launching, on SLS and in Orion, rendezvousing with a HLS, so a Starship that's already in, a lunar orbit, and taking them down to the surface. And I'm hopeful that happens soon. But look, I don't think it will. I think that there's just way too many parts and it costs too much in the process, and there's just going to be a lot of delays, and that's unfortunate. But maybe if maybe if the Chinese land on the moon before we can get back to it, it'll be a good wake up call for how we need to do things differently. But I think that that's a far more likely outcome than it is that the U.S. is going to get back there anytime soon, unfortunately. But that's not my mission. Like Polaris 3 is an end-to-end flight of Starship, which is really what should open up space for the many, because that should be the 737 of human space flight. When you're not throwing anything away, and believe me, with the current kind of Artemis plus HLS construct, you are throwing a lot of things away, and that's not going to be very scalable or efficient for the future. So we have no idea what our kind of the various objectives will be of that mission, other than a successful ascent on Starship. I think we will spend a great deal of time, proving out the habitability and kind of shakedown of Starship, and then like I said, we'll re-enter and under a propulsive landing in the same vehicle we lifted off in.
Elon was on Ben Shapiro maybe like a week ago, and his timeline was 5 years to the moon and 10 years to Mars. What do you think are like the biggest hurdles to landing on the moon, and why are you less optimistic about the timeline than Elon is?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think if it was all on Elon's shoulders, that we would be inside of those timelines. Like if the government was able to make the same financial commitment to SpaceX that they are making to all the various vendors involved in the SLS program, SpaceX gets us on the moon well before the Chinese can get there, and we are well on our way to Mars. But that's not how it works. We've got to play nice with everyone and build a part in every congressional district and not have any hurt feelings, because that's more important than winning and advancing our capabilities in the extraordinary domain of space. So it's like I have all the faith in the world in Elon and SpaceX. It's just they're not the only voice or vote in this process. There's a lot of others there, and so that to me is the answer for the moon. There's just way too many mouths to feed that are gonna, and way too many parts, and they very costly, and that's gonna delay us. With respect to Mars, I think I think the primary factor there is the availability of low cost capital, and I've said that going back to before Inspiration 4 launched, is that what SpaceX is trying to do on their shoulders, call it a bad analogy or not, it's like the Manhattan Project. That's how big of a deal we're talking about. And you're building a city in Starbase, Texas. You're building factories in Texas and at KSC. You're pioneering technology that is so far advanced, and you need to be very, very, very sure it works. There's no launch escape system. There's no splashdown in the water. Like, everything has to be perfect. And then you've got to figure out how to get the propellant manufactured on Mars so you can even come home, because this is, one-way missions are not realistic, in this environment. Like, you have to have high confidence that you'll get there, have a successful mission and come home. And you're not going to bring all that propellant with you. So there's a lot of problems to solve there. Not to mention just from a human physiology and psychology perspective. So that's what I think, these are all problems that need to be solved. But the availability of like low cost capital to fund this grand endeavor that has no obvious return. Like for sure, Starlink is a great way to help fund these endeavors. And Elon is totally correct that all the things that they are pioneering in order to make this possible have some commercial benefit to make life better here on Earth. So there's no doubt there's a lot of revenue potential from this whole thing, but it's going to take a lot for like a true Manhattan Project caliber endeavor, which is putting lots of human beings on Mars. And I think like doing that in 10 years, if the will was there and the financial resources were there, as possible, but it's a less accommodating environment these last couple of years. So.
That's too bad. You want to see that all happen as quickly as possible. I could talk to you all day, and I definitely still have a few more questions, but I want to get some questions from the listeners as well. If you are a listener, please not only go in and put the question that you'd like to ask into the comment section, go in there and repost the space as well, so we can get as many people in here as possible. Diligent, if you don't mind reading through those and starting to bring up people that have good questions, that'd be really helpful. I'll go through a couple more of my own, and then we'll move on to that. I want to make sure I respect your time, Jared. So is the moon landing the holy grail to you? Is landing on Mars the holy grail to you? Like, if you could, go out as far into the future, you had a time machine and you could just sort of witness one moment in human history, one moment in space exploration, one accomplishment or achievement. What is that for you? What would you love to see?
Well, I don't. I think landing on Mars is the, I don't know if it's the true holy grail moment, but it is a breakthrough moment that truly would mean that we have the means as a species to explore our solar system for sure. It is. I think getting back to the moon is an important milestone. It shows our commitment. It allows us to build infrastructure there and have a more permanent presence. I mean, if we can maintain the International Space Station for the last 2 decades, we should be able to maintain a lunar presence, indefinitely. I think it'll teach us capabilities. It'll help pioneer technology that's going to be important for the broader exploration of the solar system. So I think the moon is important. But we've been there before, and we went there before with far less means from a technology perspective 60 years ago. We better be able to get back and stay there. What will really test us is to get to Mars. I've said it before, like if you're on this space station and you need to come home, you're 2 hours away from being in the water. If you're on the moon and you need to come home, you're 3-4 days from being in the water. And and when you're on the moon and you look at Earth, it still looks like Earth. When you're on Mars, it is you're like 9 months away from coming home. It does not look like Earth. It looks like a blue speck in the sky. This is like a big game changer here. We haven't figured out childbirth in space. We've never done surgery in space. Like there are things that are again relate to humans' ability to survive in an environment that we weren't born into, that have to be figured out, and associated with it are just like a bunch of psychological considerations as well. So if we can get to Mars and come home, we will have solved so many things that we haven't even, I mean, we barely thought about so far. And then like that tells you that if we've got that down, we can go to other places too. So it's pretty important. That will be a breakthrough moment for us.
Is there a sci-fi universe or like fictional universe that best portrays what you would love to see in the future?
I would say that the For All Mankind is pretty solid. Not from anything from like a technical perspective or whatnot, but the fact that they have figured out a true economy that's derived from space is so vital. Because there's no reason, nothing I can tell you today about why we need lots of humans in low Earth orbit or on the moon or Mars. Nothing. Like we haven't figured out any way to derive revenue from being in space beyond what we already have known about for 60 plus years of communication satellites and optical satellites. We haven't found a reason we need to manufacture things in space yet. We haven't found any element or mineral or something that can create like an abundant power source. Like helium-3 is like the backbone of For All Mankind. It's why we had fleets of space shuttles and why NASA became like a top line revenue contributor to the US government, one of the most influential agencies. Like that to me is very exciting. If we can figure out why we need to be there, and that in itself can create revenue, and if it's creating revenue, it means people are paying for things that are like really important, that are again derived from space or from an asteroid or from another planet. Well, that gives us kind of the the rationale to maintain that presence in space and to invest further, and find other reasons, to be there and innovate. Like all of that is so important if we can figure out what that kind of real space economy is, because it isn't what we have today, not for humans. Like there isn't going to be a very big market for going up into space for 10 minutes and getting a view and accepting all that risk. It's not. Now it might help lead to other things like point to point travel. But we haven't figured it out. We haven't figured out what that true space economy is that necessitates lots and lots of people in orbit. And man, it's so important to to figuring it all out, as we need that. So for all mankind had that.
Thanks, Jared. Do you spend any time thinking about AI and robotic automation, the potential for financial and economic disruption, eventually even great abundance or superabundance? Do you have an intuition for how the next 10 years will play out here on Earth?
Well, for here on Earth, I mean, I think about AI a lot in terms of it being a great productivity enhancement. There's just human beings are doing a lot of things every single day that are just easily accomplished, with just smart AI technology. Like I mean, just the time, whether it's researching or figuring out like the right procedure. Like we've been using data for a while and machine learning, but like AI does take that to another level. I think there's a lot of areas where people are talking about AI, that are not going to happen in the immediate future, but certainly like productivity on just daily, I don't want to say annoyances, but just unnecessary use of like brain power and labor will be tackled for sure with AI and robotics. I don't expect I think like certainly AI is going to happen a lot, is going to be impacting our lives a lot faster than robotics will. um, we've got some time before the machine is cooking our food for us and such. But like I don't think like with Optimus and the direction that Tesla's going is incorrect at all. Like I think like that is that's positive, and I don't think it's going to mean it's going to put like a large portion of the society out of work. I mean, we're all more productive today than we were 30, 40 years ago, and we found better uses of our brain power and our labors. AI and robotics will do essentially the same thing. It'll make us more productive and be able to focus our energies where we can get the best return. In human spaceflight, like this is like a must have. Like already Dragon is incredibly intelligent. I mean, it's the most sophisticated autopilot I've ever seen. Doesn't mean it doesn't have like true manual capabilities to come home or to treat problems, troubleshoot problems, but it's smart, and it still is supported by mission control with a dozen people in it. When you're anywhere near the vicinity of Mars, you've got transmission delays even at the speed of light of 20 minutes. The current construct today of heavy reliance on mission control in human spaceflight has to go away, or whatever problem you're trying to troubleshoot has already gotten out of control long before you figure it, even before you know it, and certainly before the command goes back to potentially fix it. So that's going to rely on onboard intelligence, and that's not just AI. That's going to have to include a robotic capability if we're talking about things that are going to require some sort of structural repair that just humans aren't going to be able to respond fast enough for every possible contingency on things when you're literally going to Mars. So it'll play a role. Well, I hope the lunar surface is a proving ground for a lot of that robotic capability. But we're going to need it for manufacturing propellant on Mars to come home for sure, and for building out infrastructure there. So it plays a role here on Earth and in human spaceflight.
Have you been to the Optimus lab? Is that something that you're interested in monitoring the development of, or sort of outside your purview?
Oh, I would totally go if I got an invite. I mean, my kind of time attention is really SpaceX. Outside of my day job. So yeah, so I can't say I've seen anything with Optimus yet.
We'll see what we can do about getting you an invite there, Jared. That'd be fun. Uh, Last question before I go to the listeners. What should kids study if they want to become an astronaut? What path would you put someone on?
I think number one would be in kind of aerospace medicine. Health. I think being a medical professional is probably one of your best chances, honestly. So just reality, 50% of all astronauts have, space adaptation syndrome, and then there's a laundry list of other things that go wrong at like 10%, 7%, 5%. Space is very harsh on the human body, and it's a lot of it's physiological. There's psychological elements to it too. I think Eric Berger just wrote a good article on that. That's often not talked about. It's kind of hard, right? Because up until recently, it's just government astronauts. We got to keep up the hero image, which they are. But there's a lot of there's a lot of gory details associated with it. Again, we weren't born to live in microgravity, so. I mean, thank goodness, on Inspiration 4, we had a physician assistant as our medical officer, and we put her to great work. Haley did an awesome job. She dosed out two IM injections, and helped restore the crew to, be happy, healthy, and productive. But that's like going to be a reality, right? Like we're not going to have the 737 of human spaceflight and have half the people throwing up, because that's going to make the other half feel pretty pretty sick, and it's going to take all the glory glamour out of going and traveling in space. So, and this gets way worse the longer you're there. So when we're talking long duration trips to Mars and back, like there's a lot of things that are going to go wrong, and these aren't 1% chances. These are like 50% chances. So they're going to happen. You're going to need people that are going to have to take care of it. So there's not a lot of aerospace, physicians and healthcare professionals. I mean, I think Harvard just stood up a fellowship in the last year, and we've gotten to meet some doctors there. But like, it's basically just been, very much like a Houston, Johnson Space Center type, program for doctors, and that's not going to work when you have hundreds or thousands of Starships. So I think the medical field is going to be very strong. Certainly, software and hardware engineers. Like I said, you're not going to be able to rely on the current mission control construct for commanding spaceflight like the way it's been up until now. Like, you're going to need far more onboard capabilities from like a hardware structures perspective, as well as software, where I think engineers can be in high demand. And unfortunately, but it's just in touch with reality again, is like, I think the test pilot thing is going to have less and less relevancy. While I think the background for it is phenomenal, and there's a lot of ways you're kind of adjusted to the environment quicker. The skill set is going to be less and less important.
Thank you so much, Jared. I never would have thought medical would be the route to become an astronaut. That's super helpful. Hopefully that sets someone on the right path. Diligent, if you have a question, why don't you go ahead and ask, and then let's take it to the hands.
Well, I mean, I want to let the audience ask their questions. Look at all the hands up. There's a lot of interest in what you have to say, Jared. So I'm going to pass my question along to the listeners because they definitely want to ask you some things.
Sure.
All right, let's go to Josh first then. Josh, what's your question?
Hi, Jared. Hey, Diligent. Hey, Penny. Thank you so much for holding this space. I really appreciate it, and also for the time to speak. I really wanted to ask, Jared. I don't know if you've ever considered going to Mars yourself, but have you ever considered going to Mars yourself? Or like, I know it's maybe not in the first few missions, but maybe eventually.
I think that there is a long way to go from now until that point in time, but I think, to me, it's like, you just want to be able to contribute and make sure it has a solid impact. So if there was ever a time when, actually, launching a mission to Mars was now like, it's in the realm of possible now. It's just like actually executable. And I could help and contribute to it for sure. For sure.
Thanks, Jared. Let's go to SE next. SE, what's your question?
Hey guys, thanks for doing this, Penny and Jared. This has been a great conversation. I guess my question is just based on the infrastructure on the bases that are going to be put on the moon and Mars. Specifically, what companies do you think are going to contribute the most outside of the the legacy aerospace?
That's so hard to predict. but I would say that SpaceX's approach has been to vertically integrate pretty aggressively, right? They don't like dependencies on third parties. Uh, I admire it so much because it's so far beyond what I would have ever considered. You know, like if I'm you never like can't even compare yourself to the geniuses over in that world. But let's just say I started like we're going to 20 years ago, we're going to revolutionize going to space. We're gonna land rockets on ships and make them reusable. That's what the that's what my mission vision statement would have been. It wouldn't have been like making life multiplanetary. I've been like, man, it's hard enough to just figure out how to land a rocket on a ship and use it again. They knew they were going to conquer that they had to set something even more ambitious, right? Um, and I never would have said like build a spacesuit lab. I've been like, we can just buy those from somebody. Like, why is it that important? But then it becomes so like iconic and identity of an organization. It goes to like the DNA of it. Like everything we do, we're going to do ourselves and make it look cool, because that's what's going to get people fired up about the future. So I guess I would say that I think there are going to be a lot of organizations that are going to contribute to solve problems that are going to exist for sustained operations on the moon and Mars. Believe me, it's going to take a lot. There are so many things people aren't even talking about yet that are going to be necessary in order to make that ambitious objective achievable. So I do believe a lot are going to contribute. But that said, SpaceX definitely has the mindset of like we want to own as much as we can because then we have no one to blame. We own our failures ourselves. They vertically integrate a lot, so it's hard to make bets in my mind on any others right now other than SpaceX. I mean, just to give you an example, and I think a lot of people know this, a single Starship has more habitable volume than the entirety of the International Space Station, and that took like $1 trillion and who knows how many launches to build. So, you talk about like, well, who's going to build the infrastructure on the moon or Mars? They could literally land like 50 starships and connect them, and you have a city block. You have bigger than a city block. You actually have a city. You need a new space station. You need a new lunar space station. They could dock 4 or 5 starships together, and you've got something 4 or 5 times the size of the space station. So it's very hard for me to like think of an obvious second place, third place, or other contributors, even though I know there has to be. It's just too many problems. I just bet on SpaceX as being the one that's going to probably conquer the biggest ones, and it's going to leverage a lot of technology that they're building, maybe for other purposes. Like I said, Starship gets us to Mars. Starship's also infrastructure. Starship's also a space station. You just get a lot of other benefits out of what they're already investing in.
Jared, we're already on time, so I'll let you cut me off at any time, but I'm going to go through as many of these hands as quickly as possible while you're still available. Let's go to Mike next.
Hey, Penny, great interview. Thanks to you and Diligent for hosting this. Jared, I've loved your answers. Quick question. One, I can hear the frustration in your voice, knowing that you're willing and able, and that you can literally touch the sky for humanity and make these advancements, and that you're being held back by bureaucrats. I feel sorry that you're having to go through that. But I wanted to ask this question. When you talked about going up to the Hubble to preserve it for another 10 years, because that's really important to me, because I believe Hubble is one of the greatest accomplishments in human history. Is it possible to still upgrade the Hubble even more than it is right now, or is it just to maintain it and then bring it back down to keep it in the Smithsonian?
It's a great question. I can tell you, like, I wouldn't, I would not waste a mission to boost a dead Hubble. To me, it's a requirement from the get-go that Hubble has to be left in a healthier place than it is today. If you're going to give it 10 more years of life, then it better be 10 good, productive years for science. So, but I think that is a lot easier to achieve than people think. A lot of people have memories of the unbelievably awesome Hubble servicing missions, where they're replacing, INUs that are the size of refrigerators. Hey, there's a lot of power in an iPhone these days. We can literally, the structure that we could be using to dock with Hubble, we could detach a set of capabilities that is built into it, that enhances the performance of Hubble and increases the redundancy by, an order of magnitude. You may have to plug it in. Maybe you don't even have to plug it in. Maybe you can get it through another transmitter. But that's a given. Like it takes a long time to plan and train for, develop, train for a human spaceflight mission. Hubble's going down a lot. you can't take the risk of planning a mission to go and save it only to save a dead telescope. Like, you got to believe that you can give it 10 more good years of life.
All right, let's go to Lumi.
Yeah, I was going to be real quick. I was going to say, if you could take one personal item to Mars, what would it be and why? And do you feel younger going into space because of the time dilation?
I don't know if you feel younger going into space, but I don't know. It's certainly you certainly are full of energy. You're full of energy training to go to space, and flying in space, and I don't know. I don't know if it takes years off your life, but you certainly feel, I guess, young and energetic just by being on the journey. As for what I would take to Mars with me, I mean, every mission. Well, I mean, inspiration for, but I certainly have something for Polaris. I've taken something for my wife and children that I think is special. That's a one-off that I can bring home, and it'll be something that they can remember. When for years into the future, of that it was something to remember, and understand that the sacrifice was worth it. And so I imagine I wouldn't do anything different for going to Mars. There would be something special, and also let them know that I fully planned on coming home, because I don't believe in, especially in the context of Mars, that there are one-way missions.
Thank you, Jared. Turner.
Jared, so it was news to me that there's a new age space race between the US and China to the moon. How probable is it that we lose that race? And is there any sense of urgency in your community, or is it seen as been there, done that, and no longer a priority?
Oh, great question. There is no question there is a space race with China. Look, there is a race with China uh, across the board, economically, militarily. They are it's not a near peer threat. Like, they are a peer to the United States. I fully believe they've surpassed Russia in terms of their capabilities as a superpower. Look at just their pace of progress. They have a very modern space station up. They're going to space with, similar frequency to the U.S., to their space station. They're building it out. They've launched almost as many orbital class rockets last year as the U.S. has, and they don't have a SpaceX with reusable rockets. They are throwing them away every time. Their Navy is bigger than the U.S. They have a very modern Air Force. And and they have a stated intention. Look, they said I think it was 2 years ago, they said they're going to land on the moon in 2030. And I was like, that's BS. They're ahead of schedule. They have no incentive to tell us an accurate timeline. They will absolutely want to be early, because it is a ton of national prestige to get to the moon. And if they can do it before us, and we've been there before, I think that says a lot about their pace of progress, right? They just gave an update like a month ago that said they're ahead of schedule, and it's like, no kidding. There is. I don't think that the U.S. has committed, the resources, nor has the will to really get there first. If they did, we wouldn't be, again, thinking about making everyone happy and no hurt feelings and building a part in every district. We would just look at what is the best, safest way that we can get to the moon and stay there, which means it's scalable and it's efficient, and we would put our resources behind it. And I don't think a lot of people will like that answer, because that answer means it goes through SpaceX, and if it goes through SpaceX, it goes through Elon, and for as many of us that love and respect what he's accomplished, there's a lot of others, especially in the political world, that don't. And I think that, yeah, there's a lot of people who would say, I'd rather lose the moon, than fund SpaceX to get us there in the way that's needed to, I think, get there before China, for sure.
I think there's a major problem with our bureaucracy if we'd rather lose the space race than back Elon. That's frightening to me. Hitchlap, you're up.
Thanks, Penny. Diligent, great interview. And Jared, thanks so much for being here. These X Spaces interviews are really exciting, and I really appreciate your time. My question is this: what would survival on Mars look like in practical terms for food production and water and things like this? Just how would it work mechanically? Any insight you could give into this would be really appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, look, NASA's been doing awesome work on the space station for 2 decades now. I mean, we're growing things in space. I mean, they're making peppers and putting them on quesadillas up there. Like we're talking about scaling that up in a huge way. And I think universities and university age students across like the world would love the challenge of, hey, you got a dome. This is what you get from a power perspective. This is where we're at with water. Fill it with greens. Like I mean, like what would who wouldn't, if you were an engineering student, a botanist student in schools around the world, want to be working on projects like that? So I think what we're talking about is learning the way we have for the last 20 years on the space station and scaling it up in in a huge way. I also think that you're going to have starships need to be landing daily. I mean, maybe that's a little extreme. Maybe it's weekly, but like truly getting self-sustaining there has a lot of challenges associated with it. And there's no analogs here on Earth for comparison. People living in Antarctica or traveling across the oceans during the age of exploration, no comparison, zero, not even in the slightest. I think we're going to have a lot of challenges surviving on that planet for any period of time. So I think like knowing that you have like this is your arrival date, this is your return date, and that there's going to be a lot of resources coming from Earth continuously to keep things moving in the right direction is going to be paramount for 100 years before we're anywhere near like self-sustaining. But I think like the world is up for the challenge. I think students are up for the challenge, and like I said, we get the infrastructure there. You have power and you have water. We're going to take a lot from what NASA's learned on the space station and fill it with with opportunity.
Your optimism is highly contagious, and really appreciate the time, Jared. Thanks very much.
Yeah, for sure.
Alder.
Yeah, thanks, Penny, and thanks, Diligent, and Jared. Thank you not only for this conversation, but also I'm not sure if you remember, but you helped my organization run about 20K for St. Jude's a couple years ago, and that was really a highlight for our members.
Oh, cool.
I'm curious. So you talk about Starship as kind of this engine for future growth and future startups. What's the timeline for like when should founders start building those companies to take advantage of the railway that Elon has built to the stars?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, if you see opportunity, I mean, it's like forget space-based, just in general, right? Like people, when is a good time to start a company, right? I think you have to, again, just being grounded. Like 1 in 3 businesses are going to fail in the first year, if not worse. And it is super hard. It's meant to be hard. Everyone would do it if it wasn't hard. So I think you got to start with like there is opportunity here. There is something people have overlooked, or there is a problem I can solve, or the previous solution sucks and I can make it better. So you start with that. Then you got to put a whole business plan together associated with it of, okay, even if I'm succeed and I make this solution better or I solve this problem, who's going to pay for it? How do I take care of all the employees I need to conquer this problem, right? And when are they going to pay for it? And if they're not going to pay for it for many years, how am I going to bridge that gap financially? And what if I'm wrong? Like these are all things that have to be well thought out with any business if you want to give yourself a shot of making it. And look, and luck is very important along the way too. Then I would say you have to like throw so many extra conservative assumptions associated with it if we're talking about space, because space is hard, as has been said many times. Timelines slip, costs will go up in certain areas for sure, and that will just threaten a business model that much more. So yeah, I mean, if you're thinking about things for low Earth orbit, you got Falcon 9, you got reusability, you got New Glenn coming. That I think like it's still going to be expensive, but you probably, if you figured out something that's going to change the world in low Earth orbit, you could start working on it now because you have a path to get there. If what you're thinking about requires the lunar surface or Mars, I would proceed very cautiously. Again, think through all those things that I gave before, and then throw a lot of extra conservative assumptions to it, knowing that you're probably going to be late and it's going to cost a lot more than you thought.
Stephanie.
Hi, thanks, Penny, for holding this space. Hello, Jared. Nice to hear an interview with you. I don't think I caught one before, especially live on X, so that's nice. I do have a couple questions I think were kind of answered already by previous questions, but I did have one that I think was when I was reading about, in ties with you saying getting to space and whether or not it's going to be profitable, do you think, one, that we're being held up on maybe going to the moon or wherever by the fact that we haven't decided it's going to be profitable yet? From my readings, it looks like there's a lot of concerns with mining resources, getting the resources to and from. And I think that plays the same on, Earth as well. Like we have issues with mining for cleaner energy and batteries for solar. So, do you feel that mining is a big issue that we have in regards to going to space and getting those resources and bringing them back to Earth to even take advantage of that?
I think that that everything is still very expensive, and that's why Starship is so important to fixing all of this. Everything is still very expensive today. SpaceX has done an absolutely fantastic job, like more than having the cost to go to space. Well, more. I mean, like when it was the world of just United Launch Alliance. I mean, like you could be $500 million to get something into a challenging orbit. SpaceX has probably reduced that, by, I don't know, 80-90% at this point, but it's still expensive. Like we still throw away the second stage on a Falcon. And a lot of times, if it's a very challenging orbit, you could be throwing away boosters on a Falcon Heavy in order to get there. Dragon, it's fully reusable. It takes months to recover a Dragon, and it takes a mission control to support it, and a ton of planning and training to make sure it's successful. So the point is like as much progress as SpaceX has made with reusability to reduce cost, it's not inexpensive yet. And that's just low Earth orbit. That's not the moon, and that's not Mars yet. So what we need is costs to keep coming down a lot. And Elon said some things when Starship was fully stacked 2 years ago of what he thought it would come down to essentially just propellant costs, and you could turn a Starship every couple hours. Say he's wrong, and it costs more than that, and it's turned every couple of days. Huge game changer in reducing costs. And then you've got all this mass you can bring to orbit for experimenting with mining, going out and retrieving an asteroid and bringing something, chiseling off portions of it and bring it back, see what you can do with it. I don't know. But as the cost comes down, people can experiment. And when they experiment, who knows what the breakthroughs could be. Again, maybe it's 3D printing organs, or maybe it is manufacturing or mining asteroids. And maybe we do figure out a way to really, maximize the power output from helium-3 or something similar to that. We have no idea. Like we know so little because we haven't been able to experiment because it has cost so much. So look, the single biggest breakthrough has to be reducing the cost to accelerate mass to orbit. That's what, SpaceX and Elon have been laser focused on. Starship will be the evolutionary leap in that regard, and then we'll see from there.
All right,
Thanks.
thanks, Stephanie. Last raised hand is Lucky.
Well,
Lucky,
thanks,
what's your
Penny,
question?
Jared, Diligent. You guys all have the best vibes. I swear. I'm just vibrating right now. Thanks for bringing me up. Thanks for holding the space. This is phenomenal. I cannot wait until we see civilian spacesuits. How long, Jared, do you think before we start seeing a feedback loop where civilians can start inputting their fashion designs into the space industry and seeing some of that feedback into our hands? Because I would love to purchase a spacesuit, just even to have behind me while I give my X spaces. And I think it would be really cool. Another question quick here. Um, this food thing, you guys talk about being in long duration flights. Why don't we come up with like a competition for a recipe book for long-term duration flights, recipes that are spicy like wasabi, hot peppers, things to open up the sinus cavities, increase flow of the mucosa glands, and help with long-term space flight?
Yeah, I mean, just hitting both those questions. I think right now we're again like we're taking we're taking steps, right? But they're not giant leaps yet. Like we're going from multi-$100 million spacesuits to something that costs materially less. in the form of these early SpaceX suits. But look, there's still a lot of engineering that's going into it. Like we're a long way, from getting like to the point that this can be, bought off the shelf, or start like imparting your own kind of, taste or fashion into design. I mean, still like these things are like, thermal nightmares. Pretty much white is going to be the predominant color for a period of time, unless you want to get cooked. So we're limited right now, but at least we're taking steps, right? If we just did things the way they were before, you'd have an RFP every 30 years, and it would be $1 billion program that would take 10 years. Like SpaceX is doing something with it now. Like we're at least on the way, but which is certainly better than where we were before. So like we're on the way, but I think it's a while before these are off the shelf type things, and we're certainly constrained heavily right now. In terms of the mobility that are in the suits, and the color scheme of it. Like we're still dealing with the harsh realities of space, and that limits a lot. And then in terms of food, I think again we got to take we're taking baby steps here in this. We it's very hard to have like thermal elements for heating in a spaceship. They're fire hazards. They like these. It doesn't mean you can't overcome them, but I'll tell you, even on like a 5-day mission with Polaris Dawn, we're not gonna have warm food. Like we can keep some stuff chilled, just as we did with Inspiration 4, and maybe it'll last a little bit longer, which is great. But we're still it's still very constrained in that environment too. But where is the opportunity for all this experimentation and innovation going to happen? It's when you got factories cranking out hundreds of Starships, and it costs so little to send them up to space and bring them back home. That's where all the experimentation is really gonna begin.
Thank you very
All
much.
of the
I think I got
updates
one more, Penny, if before I got to run. So
let's make it quick, Lucky.
So, what was your favorite food in space then?
I had cold pizza. It was great.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, guys. Thanks for having me. Love you all.
Thanks, Lucky. Thanks for showing up, Jared. That's the last hand. I have plenty more requests, but your time is very valuable. I hope maybe I can get you back some other time instead of drawing it out too long today. Is there anything that you want to share with the audience yourself? Anything you want to talk about before we cut it off?
No, look, I love all the enthusiasm. These are great questions. I like that people are thinking about the future and what it could be like, right? Because day to day, it isn't always great, right? Like you wake up and you have good days and you have bad days, and like the world isn't a healthy place all the time. And that's not just from sickness, right? But like war and all the conflicts that we deal with. It's hard, but I think when you can, lift your head up really high and, look to the stars and think about the world that could be someday, it gets exciting. And that's what I hear in a lot of these questions. And I can tell you, I mean, that's certainly what SpaceXers and Elon wake up to do every day, is like, what are the absolute hardest, near impossible challenges that people only dream of in fantasy books? And how do we bring it, into reality and make the world a better and more interesting place? And it's awesome to see. It's awesome to be a fly on the wall of, and I love that so many people who listen to this ask questions that they're dreaming about those things too. So, thanks.
Yeah, we all love it very much, and thank you so much for joining, Jared. It was an absolute pleasure. As I said earlier, you do what we all wish that we could do. So to give us access and allow us to ask some questions has been really super nice. You enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye, Jared.